There is one big issue of contention between the United States and Britain. It involves a British practice called impressment. The Royal Navy was not a career chosen by many. At any time, life aboard a Royal Navy man of war was rough. Sailors were packed tight together on the vessel. They slept one over another in hammocks. Close, unwashed bodies created a foul odor. They ate a biscuit that was as hard as rock until it was boiled to rehydrate it. Even after boiling, it wasn't that soft, and the biscuits often had weevils or worms in them. The Royal Navy had learned to have sailors eat limes to make certain they didn't get sick. Not tasty, but effective, because scurvy was more frequent at sea than on land. Sailors were at sea for as much as a year at a time. During Britain's wars with Napoleon, the sailors might never touch land for 3 or 4 years. There was a reason for this. Once a sailor got to land, he often failed to come back to the ship. Britain needed every sailor and more to keep its navy going and to maintain the blockade of Napoleon's Europe. When enough sailors could not be recruited or ordered into the navy as a punishment by the criminal courts, the navy sends out press gangs. These gangs of burly sailors just grabbed able-bodied lower-class British men from the streets and dragged them off to ships. The process was called impressment. When British warships made harbor, they usually stayed over a mile offshore. This was to prevent the sailors from jumping overboard and swimming ashore. However, sailors were always abandoning their stations. British officers were concerned. It took years to train a man to be a quality sailor, such as was needed on the most powerful British warships. It was essential that the Royal Navy arrest and return any British sailor that had skipped ship. They were valuable personnel. British naval captains began stopping American ships. They lined up the sailors and inspected them. If British officers believed one of the sailors on an American ship was actually a British naval sailor who had skipped ship, he was arrested and taken over to the British warship. Of course, everyone claimed they were American. Because people from Britain were always immigrating to America, there was a problem. In those days, there were not papers to show just what was your citizenship. British officers felt justified in seizing anyone who was clearly British and putting them to work on the warships fighting Napoleon. At one point, Britain was alone against all of Napoleon's Europe. It needed every man it could muster to maintain the power of the Royal Navy. Americans had no concern for what would happen to Britain. They considered the war between Napoleon and Europe as something across the ocean and different from them. Americans considered themselves free from the rotten rules of European kingdoms. They resented the idea that anyone would interfere with their lives. Continued British interception of American ships, along with the frequent impressment of sailors on those ships, infuriated Americans. Americans felt that no one had the right to stop their ships on the high sea, much less board, inspect, and impress sailors. The continued impressment of sailors from American ships also made the American government look weak. The problem was the American government was weak. Its small navy was no match for the massive Royal Navy. That created a difficult decision. Should the United States take the chance and go to war over British impressment, or should it endure the harassment and humiliation? Was there a real choice? Pressure is really mounting on President Madison to act in response to British impressment of sailors. Madison continues to resist going to war. He worries about how such a war would progress.